to victory. Doug Wolfgang running second, and then quite a bit of racetrack back to the third position, car driven by Keith Kaufman. Here are Swindell and Wolfgang down the backstretch. Sammy moving to the inside, looking for an opportunity to pass that slower car ahead of him. Cannot find it.
Looks like Ron Schumann that they're going to work on, and that's an unusual position for that driver. One of the top in the country, getting lapped in just a 33-lap race.
And here's a finish, and it was almost a side-by-side finish, but Sammy Swindell did hold on to win the race, with Doug Wolfgang finishing a close second. And perhaps it was Wolfgang's intention to indicate to Sammy Swindell that in the second portion of this race, it may be a little bit closer. I think maybe that last move there was a subtle hint to Sammy that it's not going to be easy.
Well, we're looking at Bobby Wilkins, the Milford, Delaware driver. Not a whole lot of sprint car drivers out of the Delaware state, who has apparently blown an engine as the field came down to take the checkered flag. Bobby started this race in 28th position. He was not really a factor here in the first 33-lap segment, but he certainly has sprayed the front stretch with oil.
Everybody heads into the pits now for a refuel and for a check of the tire situation. There is Doug Wolfgang stopping right ahead of him is the winner of the first segment of that race, Sammy Swindell, and everybody else also in.
As a matter of fact, our first three finishers, 3 or 4, I'm not quite certain, Kaufman in the Boops #1 along with Jeff Swindell in the bright yellow #1 ended up battling the last couple laps of the race, and I don't know if Jeff Swindell officially was recorded in third or whether or not Kaufman was, but at any rate, Sammy Swindell, Doug Wolfgang, and Jeff Swindell nose to tail along pit road here, and we're watching closely to see what changes they made. The first thing that happened to the Swindell car is that right rear tire came off.
Well, Sammy, of course, conferring with members of the crew, telling them what kind of a tire compound he wants for the second portion of the race that he hopes will lead him to an overall victory here.
Swindell was a participant at this race a year ago. By far and away, that his performance this year is the most impressive he's ever had here. He was the 6th fastest qualifier in 81. He came home in 10th position.
Let's go down to Dick Berggren, who's working the pit area for us. Dick?
Sammy, you're flying out there. Can you continue in the second half this well?
Well, I hope so. We just have to see what happens. Everything holds together. Things look real good right now, and we'll just...
Wolfgang was closing on you toward the end, Sammy.
Well, we got in the traffic pretty deep, and I knew it was late in the race, and well, it's not over till the end, so we just thought I just sort of took it easy and had to run with the flow of traffic. I think that's what it was.
What kind of shape's the track in?
The track's getting better and better as we run. It gets stickier and stickier. The groove's a little wider than it has been, so it's a lot easier to maneuver through the lap cars.
Sammy Swindell said he'd leave it every lap. So far, so good.
What change front tire?
Sammy Swindell being asked if he wants the front tires changed. That kind of activity going on right now up and down pit road. We'll take this break, be back for more action from Syracuse after this. On up and down pit road, as the first section of this race has been completed, Sammy Swindell finished first, Doug Wolfgang second, Keith Kaufman third, Jeff Swindell fourth, and Bobby Davis finished in 5th position. Doug Wolfgang closed in on Sammy Swindell rather significantly in the late portions of that race. And Sammy Swindell said it was because of race traffic. What does Doug Wolfgang have to say about it? Here is Dick Berggren.
Doug Wolfgang, you were closing toward the end of the race. Have you got enough stuff in this car to beat Sammy Swindell in the second half?
I think he's a little stronger than me all by himself right now. I closed up because of lap traffic. The track is really greasy, and it's hard to pass the lap cars because of the dust out of the, out in the second groove, out in the high groove, and I think he is a little stronger all by himself.
What kinds of things are you doing to your car to try to get more speed in the second half, Doug?
Well, we're going to put fresh tires on it, but I don't really know. Seem to be tied up a little bit today. I'm a little stuck to the ground too tight, or the motor isn't running real crisp off the starts, and that loses me about a quarter of a straightaway all the time. And I seem to be all right, but he's just a little bit better.
Doug Wolfgang looking for a little more speed this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So an interesting comment there from Doug. He pretty much agreed with Sammy Swindell that it was indeed race traffic that allowed him to close in.
Well, it's kind of ironic that Wolfgang drives the number 75, because that was really the year that Wolfgang surfaced as one of the top drivers in sprint car racing. Spent about 3 or 4 years running modifieds back home in the upper Midwest. But as soon as he jumped into a sprint car, this guy was spectacular. And he's been chasing Sammy Swindell most of this year. He spent a lot of the last couple of seasons chasing Steve Kinzer. He's been a bridesmaid a lot, but as we told you earlier in the show, there are a whole lot of folks around the country who think that Doug Wolfgang is the cat's meow. How about that? You had a long time since you heard that one, didn't it?
Yeah, not long enough, though. Back with more action from Syracuse, New York, as we cover the Syracuse Super Nationals on ESPN Auto Racing 82. Larry Nuber and Dick Berggren at Syracuse, New York for the Super Nationals. This is how they finished in the first part of our race here, 33 laps. We've got now 30 to go. Sammy Swindell crossed the finish line first. Doug Wolfgang was second, Keith Kaufman third, and Jeff Swindell was fourth. There has been a lot of activity on pit road in the past 15 minutes. A recap from Dick Berggren.
The activity on pit road was certainly intense, but nevertheless very well organized. These crews conducted themselves like the professionals most of them really are. Among the changes that were made, Sammy Swindell already told you that he changed 4 tires and put on new ones. They weren't really new tires. They were scuffed-in tires, like Doug Wolfgang. That he had a problem with the back end of the car sticking too well. He made an adjustment to the airfoil. That should help resolve that problem. Dave Wickham's car was overheating, so they did some work on the radiator there trying to cool it off. And Bobby Allen, who started well up in the front, started drifting back during the race. What had happened to him was, amazingly, the airfoil began to break loose, and as it did, he was steering the car actually to the wall, so he had to back off so he wouldn't hit things. Well, they've got the airfoil squared away on Bobby Allen's car, and he's optimistic. But most optimistic of all, Keith Kaufman. Talked to him, and Keith Kaufman says, I think we can win this thing. They've made essentially no changes in his car except putting a new set of tires on, the same thing he had right along. And that super modified they talked about earlier, Eddie Thompson's car, Eddie Thompson is also very optimistic. He says there are holes out there, but he's figured out how to dodge them. All he's doing is just driving around the rough stuff, staying up where it's nice and smooth like a super modified driver has to do. It's all done here in the pits. It's all on the racetrack now.
And the number 91 car driven by Ed Thompson, as we mentioned earlier, the only super modified in this race, and Ed is doing very well. He started 36th.
Well, he's finished 10th and 11th in recent Syracuse races, and now he runs in 11th position again. A low slung, heavier than the sprint car, super modified, a car that was built to run on pavement, and Thompson is again here in 1982 doing just an excellent job on the 1 mile dirt at Syracuse. You can see how different the car appears to the sprint cars. The profile is much lower. Even the wing sits lower because of the lower center of gravity engineered into the car, and how different it does look.
An official finish showed that Bobby Davis Jr. finished 5th in the race just completed, the first portion of this race. 6th place went to George Bischoff. Finishing 7th was Kenny Jacobs. 8th, Shane Carson. 9th was Bobby Weaver, and 10th was Steve Yodak.
A little bit of looseness there in the restart of this race. You can see that the field is jumbled behind the first 3. Theoretically, they're supposed to be single file, but a lot of folks trying to inch ahead.
And not only that, but they are starting the cars exactly as they cross the finish line. In other words, there are lapped cars starting toward the front of the pack. Green flag comes out once again, and the race resumes. Now the battle will also resume between Sammy Swindell and Doug Wolfgang down the backstretch. We'll be looking for other drivers to move up, including Keith Kaufman, who had an excellent first 33 laps. Sammy Swindell, though, who led all the way in that first portion, looks strong here in the early going of portion number 2. 1 lap is completed, 29 more to go, and this race will be history.
Well, ironically enough, or maybe it's not irony, maybe it's just an indication of the fact that they are the factory house cars. Swindell runs the Nance factory car. There is Sammy. That factory is out of Wichita, Kansas. A team that ran USAC a couple of years ago with Billy Tyler as its driver. And the second running car of Doug Wolfgang on the far right-hand side of your screen. There he is following Swindell down the front stretch. That's the Gary Stanton factory team. They are out of Phoenix, Arizona. There are quite a number of factories that are represented here. The Ben Cook people out of Coiningham, Pennsylvania. They had 3 cars that participated in this main event. Bobby Allen had a couple of cars of his design. The Gambler people out of Nashville, Tennessee, to be exact, Hendersonville, they were also represented by 4. But all in all, we had about 17 different chassis represented in the 41 starters here. But right now, 2 of the house factory cars, Nance in the first position and Stanton in the second position. The sprint cars coming from all around this country.
And you know, these cars look very much alike, but there is as much competition among the chassis builders in this type of racing as there is in, for instance, NASCAR racing when you're talking about Buicks and Pontiacs and Fords.
Well, Sammy Swindell really appears to be invincible at this point. Wolfgang, who flattened the wing out. Now, what that does, it compensates if they have a deficiency of horsepower. Now, Dick Bergman also told you that Doug felt that the car was getting too much bite in the tail. You make the car less aerodynamic in terms of the downforce, perhaps a little more streamlined in that category of the aerodynamics, but they've taken away the downforce by flattening out the wing. That'll make the car stick not quite as well on the racetrack, but it also means that it's not as stable. So Wolfgang has to drive a little harder, has to be a little more careful than what Swindell and the other people who have those wings that are poised at about a 15 to 20 degree angle to the horizon.
Sammy Swindell has already caught up to some of the slower traffic and is lapping Doug Wolfgang, 29 years old, makes his home in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, running in second position. When he isn't racing, Doug plays racquetball, is involved in snowmobile racing and motorcycling. Doug Wolfgang, though, has his work cut out for him today, trying to catch the driver who has dominated the weekend here at Syracuse, New York, in sprint cars, Sammy Swindell. Yesterday, breaking the world's record on a 1-mile dirt track at over 128 miles an hour, and so far leading all the way here this afternoon in our race. Look at that impressive figure, 314 career feature victories for Sammy Swindell.
27 of them in 1981 came in World of Outlaw competition. He was the leading winner in the World of Outlaws. He has won 14 times this year, 65 times in his career, as he goes to the high side of one of the East Coast drivers, the number 75 car, as we complete lap number 40 of the scheduled 63.
Swindell broad sliding that car in turns 1 and 2. We're continuing to notice a bit of a rut down there in turn number 1, which is on the extreme inside of the racetrack, but it has caused no serious problems to this point. Now, we have had no accidents in this race. We did have a potentially dangerous situation in the first portion of this race when a tire came off and bounced very, very high down the main straightaway, came into the grandstand, but luckily did not hit anyone. It did tear up a section of seats, though, knocked the back off of it. But luckily, no one was seated in that area and no injuries occurred.
Well, the guy who's really beginning to move now is Shane Carson, the Oklahoma City driver. Right now, Shane enters turn number 3.